Professor Layachi would like to have her picture. Yeah.
I think we've still got some people coming in, but we're going to get started, I think. And first, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you, students and classes. This is very exciting. A little bit nervous for us. This is the first in-person event we've had since March 2020, when we were, we moved online. So for us as a department, politics for St. John's, like, this is a real sense of being back to what's not quite a normal semester, but quite a bit closer than it's been in a while. So we're really glad to be able to do something like this, with the students and with our guests. So the event today is human rights and democratization, and it addresses some of the issues of promoting and defending human rights in the face of a historical moment where democratization and democratic promotion is maybe not at the fore of U.S. policy the way it had been previously. And so we've got a bunch of some great speakers and some commentators who are going to give us some background about the situation in particular contexts. Right. What I'm going to do now is provide some introductions and then hand it over to my colleague Hamid, who will do the actual moderating, and then some speakers. So first up, we have Dr. Pamela Kay Struss, right, at the very end. Right, and she's a scholar practitioner from the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. We share a little bit of background in terms of conflict resolution, and I'm really happy to have her here. I know the program at George Mason is an excellent graduate program in conflict resolution, right? And one that has really done some amazing training and brought some great students out. Next to her is Farida Bouattoura. I pronounce her yet? Farida, who in some ways was the genesis or the starting point for this whole presentation. Farida was a former student of mine, one of the best, one I really enjoyed, way back when I first got started, right? Not that long ago. But she contacted me this summer to sort of talk about human rights in Algeria and her own personal connection to the process of democratization. And that brought her towards very much of an activist presentation and a position of an activist. And one that I think is really central to how we go about things. Right? One of the things we want to talk about is how we make things happen. And the activists are often the ones who do. And although you can't clear up on the screen, the other person I'm going to introduce you is Elise Jentz, who had previously taught with us as an academic faculty, and hopefully will come back again. But is also a scholar from the School University, a PhD student, and an activist with Kurdish human rights issues in Kurdistan. Next to her, we have our own Dr. Azzedine Layachi, an expert on the Middle East and North Africa, right, who was in the midst of a chapter on the particular issue of mobilization for democratization in Algeria, and someone's going to offer some scholarly commentary. And then our special guest today is Ambassador John Limbert. And Ambassador Limbert is a very distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service. Someone who, from a quick look at his resume, has been some of the really most interesting and exciting assignments, particularly in the Middle East and I guess what we call West Asia, right? Right? Not quite the Middle East country you talked to, right? As well as Mauritania, the Chief of Mission in Sudan, President of the American Foreign Service Association, 2 wars in Iraq in 2003, 2004, right? Served as Deputy Assistant of the State for Iranian affairs. Someone with a deep professional interest in many of the places that are at the core of the sort of theoretical concept of how we promote human rights and promote democratization at a time when the policies are very difficult. And finally, we have a moderator, Hamid, who is a practitioner of conflict resolution, a mediator, as well as one of the directors of RISE, which is the organization that is co-sponsoring this event with us. Is that pronounced? We go enterprise.
Yes.
Right? And active in promoting these very issues. So, Hamid, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Cocozzelli, and thank you everyone for coming. 20.7 million people, refugees. 5.7 million Palestinians, currently refugees. 48 million people internally displaced. 4.1 million asylum seekers. 3.9 million Venezuelan displaced all over the world. Millions of people jailed for their opinions. In Algeria, we call them hostages, kidnapped, and the list goes on, and we're talking 2021. So if you're here to learn about these issues, this is the right place. And in collaboration or in partnership with the university, we're here to feed your brains with this plethora of experts, not only by knowledge, by training, but also practice. And also later, we will feed your stomachs. We have something in the back. So this is, we're here to get as much as we can. You have heard the bio. John, I call him John, and Parvani, his wife, are friends of my wife and I. We met him 20 years ago in Mauritania. And I will give you a very brief story about him. He doesn't know, they don't know, and this will summarize their personality. It was 2003, 28 June, our wedding day in Mauritania. A week before a failed military coup attempt. I said, my God. My wife said, there is no wedding. Moreover, there is no Limbert showing up. It's impossible. And she said, you don't know him. Don't worry. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter. He came. They both came. And the city was boiling. Military everywhere, police, gendarmes. And the wedding was taking place outside the city, 20 miles outside. Worse, his advisors at the embassy told him, don't go. And maybe in his speech, he will tell us the mindset. And if you want to have this experience or this future career, this is the right man. Thank you. And please welcome Ambassador Farida. Please. And Madame Limbert.
Well, thank you very much, Hamid, and thank Dr. Cocozzelli and everyone from RISE and St. John. I'm going to pull my mask down because we're both fully vaccinated, so I don't think I'm going to spread anything to you and far enough away. No, what Hamid didn't say is that not only did we go to his wedding, but we danced at his wedding. On the beautiful beach, on the beautiful Atlantic beaches of Mauritania. Also to thank the other panelists. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from them. I had the honor of serving our country for 35 years as in the Foreign Service, including 2 amazing years in Algeria back in the 1980s. I learned 2 things out of that. One is that democracy, human rights, what we were talking about today, it's very hard. This is very hard stuff, and I don't think anybody would argue with that. I think what we're going to hear today should reinforce that. The second thing I learned was that no one was interested in hearing sermons from the United States about human rights, democracy, or just about anything else. Why not? Well, with apologies to our hosts, I mean, I know we're a religious school, but most sermons are boring. And second, they too often they drip, at least our government sermons, they're loaded with hypocrisy. There's always a sort of an element of hypocrisy in them, barely concealing self-interest. I mean, if you want to be saved, send me money. And if you really want to be saved, send me more money. Third, sermons are also an invitation to what we all like to call whataboutism. Because the answer to the sermon is, well, yes, but what about the Palestinians? And what about the Native Americans? And what about Hiroshima? Which kind of thing leads to sort of what I call playground exchanges about who started it, who did this, who did that. And in my experience, in the world of politics, most people don't react well to sermons. You know, the U.S. Institute of Peace did a series of books on negotiating with different cultures. They have a series on negotiating with Korea, with China. I did the one on negotiating with Iran. But then they did one called Negotiating with the United States. And they talked to people who had negotiated with the United States. And the picture that emerged, frankly, as you might guess, was not pretty. The subtitle of the book was Negotiating with Americans, Bullies, Preachers, Wheeler Dealers, and Legal Eagles. But notice the preachers get top billing there. Now, until recently at least, a great part of our government's message, and a lot of what I did personally in my service, was about democracy. And we often reminded our host governments, that the key was the willingness to respect limits on time in power, and to accept the results of a fair election, win or lose. The possibility that you might lose an election. Well, I don't have to tell you in this room how, if you're an American representative today, taking that message, you're in a pretty shaky position. You've got a hard message. It's a hard message to put out there. And even without that, though, even before our recent events, we too often, it was a losing battle. It was really a hard case to make. I mean, how do you convince someone that he should move out of the presidential palace, and that he should give up his chauffeur cars, his private jet, and his crowds of sycophants? What's the saying? Power corrupts. Absolute power is a lot of fun. And it is. It is, unfortunately. I'll give you some examples. Guinea. We were in Guinea in 1993. They held an election. And what the government did was to simply cancel the votes from the opposition strongholds districts, so that, which is about 1/3 of the total vote of the population of the country, in order so the current president could avoid a runoff. As my colleague there said, who was ambassador, he said, well, the election, it wasn't free, it wasn't fair, but it was very transparent. I mean, a recent American president and a former mayor of this great city, I think, could have learned a lesson from those Guineans as to how you manage to an election. I mean, they did try something similar, but they failed at it. I remember a conversation with the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni. This was Mr. Museveni became president of Uganda in 1986. In 2005, he was still president, and I listened to an American senior official politely suggests that he step down. And the American official mentioned the example of George Washington, who after 2 terms simply said, no, that's enough, I'm going to step down. 2 terms isn't, 8 years, 2 terms is enough. And Museveni looked at this man and said, why the hell did he do that? It was stupid. It was a stupid thing to do. And by the way, I should say that he's still president. In 2021, he was reelected for a 6th term. Okay. So how do you make the case? How do you make the case? Obviously not by preaching, but maybe the best way is by example. A couple of examples that I can remember made the case very strong, much more strongly than anything we could have said. Al Gore in 2001 ruling against himself in the Senate in a disputed election. The funeral of King Hussein in 1999, where President Clinton not only attended, but he was attended by 3 former presidents, Ford, Carter, and Bush. A friend commented, they said, in our country, a former president is either in exile, in prison, or in the cemetery, but not on the presidential plane. Okay. I was going to mention the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll mention it 10 seconds. That's the objective criteria. That's what we would come back to. Not our standards. We're not imposing your standard. We want you to observe the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which you, as all members of the UN, are a party to. And all the countries I think we're going to discuss today are parties to that. One final observation. Everyone, I believe, personally, I'm speaking personally, I believe everyone, every person, every human being deserves a government that treats them decently. It doesn't imprison journalists, women's rights advocates, writers, scholars, human rights lawyers, university professors, bloggers, comedians, and those kind of people. How do we get there? That's hard. That's the hard part. But in my experience, that goal is not usually achieved by military invasion. I was in Iraq, did a couple tours in Iraq, 2003, 2004. We weren't getting there. Or subverting another government, no matter how disgusting its politics. I will end here. Look forward to hearing from the other speakers and to look forward to a lively question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Just a quick reminder. So when we're finished with the 5 speakers, actually, we have Elif. She's online from Canada. We will have some questions and open the floor for you. Professor Layachi is a compatriot from Algeria, like me. He thinks I don't know him. Yes, physically, but I've been doing research and writing on Middle East, Africa issues, and you cannot help it. You have to come across his work, whether you like it or not. It's always, he pops up. It's him. It's his work. I don't know how he finds the time to be a practitioner, teacher, researcher, writer, and say yes for any help you ask without any hesitation. I didn't know him. I wrote him email, hey, I am Hamid Algerian. Do you want to speak to us? Oh, of course, absolutely. And here we are. Thank you, Dr. Layachi. Please.
Thank you, Hamid.
You're welcome.
Honored. I wish I had 2 hours.
You have only 10 minutes.
I can put a timer for myself, but I'll trust myself all the time. And wants to speak about the social movement in Algeria. For that country, unique, and even on a world scale, it also remains one of very few of that kind. Huge, massive movement that began on February 22nd, 2019, with millions of people coming out at once. Why? Because they opposed, as the ambassador was speaking about, people wanting to stay forever in power. The president Bouteflika of Nigeria wanted a fifth term of 6 years. And that would have appeared normal if he was not almost totally paralyzed. He could not even lift a hand. He could not speak. And he has not appeared in public in years. And still wants a fifth term. We don't know whether he really wanted it or the people around him needed him to stay so that they could keep the privileges and the powers that they had. So that's it. I wanted to start my presentation with a background to all these events, which is a background of 30 years. I'm trying to sum it up in a few words for you so to see what brought on this social movement. Algeria, like many other countries in the global south, has been ailing from many social and economic and political difficulties. After gaining its independence in 1962 from colonial France, and following a very brutal war, I grew up in that war, during that war, about 7.5 years with 1.5 million people dead, Algeria engaged after that in the plan to build a socialist economy that would cater to the needs of everyone from the cradle to the grave. And it really did for a while. The socialist system had a centrally planned economy, which shunned the private sector and relied mostly on state companies, and a political system controlled by a few heroes of the war. And by the way, the president I was talking about was one of them. Heroes of the war for independence. Starting in 1965, the country's governance was in the hands of the military, following the military coup, and then the military controlled the country directly or indirectly since then until now. This post-independence system managed to improve the socioeconomic conditions of most people in the first few years, thanks to generous distributive state, which relied mostly on revenues from extensive oil and natural gas resources. This is a phenomenon that we are aware of for a few countries that are called red-tier states. However, the development strategy reached its limit by the early 1980s. Both the planned industrialization and an agrarian revolution failed to bear fruits, and when the oil prices drastically dropped, then the country experienced in 1988 its first mass rioting. A lot of young students, young kids, stormed the streets and started destroying everything and just saying enough is enough. But the riots were followed by a harsh military repression, which killed 500 of them right in the streets of the city where I was growing up and others. And as if to make up for the massacre, the rulers decided to open up the political system. Suddenly, the one-party system disappeared, and there's a multi-party system that was established. Freedom of association, freedom of the press, and so on. And suddenly, 62 parties instead of just one. But among the new political formations, two types of organizations proved to be powerful and constantly challenging the system. The Islamists and the Berber Party. Berber Party is an ethnic-based party, and there were also associations. In the first three elections that were held, first three multi-party elections, the Islamists won landslide, municipal elections, and the first balloting of the parliamentary elections. That's when the military said, excuse me, we are not continuing. They stopped the elections. They canceled the results, and then they asked the president to resign. So it was a coup, a polite one. Excuse me, here is a letter that you are going to president I mentioned earlier was placed in power after coming from exile. It's a long story. They needed someone known to the people, someone respected, someone who was not necessarily involved in what was happening in the country because he was in exile. And then he became the president after the Black Decade. The Black Decade was a terrible decade of killing, in some cases mass killings by the Islamists and revenge killing by the government. So we ended up with 200,000 people dead within a decade, and also massive displacement, 1.8 million internally displaced people, and also the infrastructure really badly damaged by the war. And so with Bouteflika, this president, there was an amnesty to the Islamists. If you come down from the mountains and give up your weapons, you will be forgiven forever, no questions asked. So peace came back thanks to these two initiatives of amnesty. And after peace and security returned to a traumatized country, really traumatized, ruling elite, however, failed to bring about effective change in the governance system and in an economy that still depended heavily on the price of hydrocarbons. Every time the price of hydrocarbons went down badly, expect problems. The opposition to the system was weak, divided, and with no capacity to challenge the rulers. There was also the fear that a harsh push for change may bring back the nightmare of the decade. They were afraid. People were afraid of what had happened in the 1990s. In late 2018, on the eve of this historic mass movement that we were talking about, the Hirak, called the Hirak, H-I-R-A-K, Algeria was in a very difficult context marked by 50% drop in oil and gas revenues. And the Algeria gets 98% of its export earning from oil and gas, 98%, which means if there were no sales, the country starves. And then there was a weak and dwindling industrial production, almost nothing. Very high youth unemployment, especially graduate, those with degrees. And a persistent housing crisis, it's like a permanent housing crisis, rising inflation, rampant corruption, and mounting criminality as well. Of course, when you have all the others, criminality is just a matter of time. And increasing attacks by armed groups belonging to Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. This is something that came out of the 10-year war. And there was also a steady return of conservative Islamism wrapped in pro-democracy slogans. And finally, violence and insecurity in neighboring Libya and Mali, which created a problem because some of the groups fighting there were seeping into the territory. On top of this, of course, the government was using a language of fear-mongering in the hope of delaying necessary political and economic reform, saying we are in danger, there is this threat, and coming from the outside and from the inside, and so on. So this partly explains why Bouteflika stayed on for 4 terms. 4 terms every time. The constitution, of course, was changed to do away with the term limit. Now, it's something that happened in many countries, unfortunately. And then he stayed on because he was the stabilizer. He was security man. He was the one that could keep the country together, stable, and also well defended. During his 20 years in power, you let me know if time is almost time. A wealth of youth talent was held down by the system, and the country's economic potential was wasted away by inept policies and abject corruption. Corruption just was incredible. And then the Iraq movement came when it was announced that he was looking for a 5th term. That was it. The youth said, how could we respect ourselves by letting the country in the hands of people like that? Really, they put it in these terms. And they said, we're going to own this country. We're going to change it now. We are not leaving. We're not taking boats to go to Europe. We're staying here now. And we're going to bring about a change. And it was an incredible moment. And so they started roaming the streets with slogans and all wrapped in the Algerian flag. and calling for the end of his term, of his presidency. And of course, power remained in the hands of the military. So the military had to speak to finally let go. And finally, they decided that Article 102 of the Constitution said that if a president is incapacitated, physically or mentally, that he has to leave. So they just served him. Sir, you are not capable of ruling, now you got to leave. So he was supposed to resign. They hoped that this would quiet the social movement. The social movement was not going for it. Say, yes, we did not want him for a fifth term, but now we want the entire system to change. Everyone has to go. Everyone, including the chief of staff who was talking to them and dealing with them directly, saying, including you, Mr. Cocozzelli was his name. We want everybody else. We want a clean slate, and that's the only way we can reclaim the country. We can build something better than this. Those were the terms. So it was a non-compromising position. The only, and this, you had really people coming from all walks of life. The middle class, the poor. You had a huge also participation of women in the streets of Algeria. And then you had handicapped people, people with, with wheelchairs and so on, wanting the system to change. It was a sea. If you could see pictures, you could just Google it, and you could see the pictures of the movement. It was a moment unknown to the country, where you had millions of people in all cities of the country all at once. Every Friday after the prayer of midday, people would go and start demonstrating. And every Tuesday, all students would not go to school and would demonstrate. That has been going on since then, and it's still going on today. The problem is the pandemic came along, and the pandemic stopped everything. So for a whole year, no Iran. The people who organized the movement said, it's fair, we don't want any health issues, let's stop it. Now they return. It is like a lukewarm kind of movement. It is not as big, as large as it was. The government has managed to soften it through many measures, of course, repression. We have probably close to 1,500 people arrested, and many more are being harassed. And so the movement itself, the momentum of the movement is not as strong as it was. And now, of course, the country is being presented by the government as being under a constant external threat. The external threat coming from the region, and also rising tensions with neighboring country, Morocco. I just heard today that Algeria cut off all the rights of Moroccan airlines to cross the Algerian territory, which is an escalation to what has been happening. So a war is up in the air. And so the Algerians have to pull together, forget about the call for democracy. We need to pull together in order to defend the country. And we have Israel next to us. Since the Moroccans have established official diplomatic relations with Israel, and the Israelis are helping the Moroccans with military technology, and especially spy technology, Pegasus case, then the Algerians think that the Israelis have a border with Algeria, and that constitutes a national threat. So the government is trying to use all these kinds of issues in order to say to the protesters, you are really distracting us from the real issue, which is security. And this has been used before by governments, not the first time. So the question is, has the movement achieved anything? It did achieve a lot of things, but not a regime change. What has happened in Algeria, just like it happened in Tunisia, in Egypt, okay, is a consolidation of the authoritarian rule. The rulers have been able to adapt and use especially technology now to control everyone that is challenging them. And the question to the activists, and hopefully we'll have a debate on it, what is to do in order to keep pushing for change? And I'm going to stop here because I want to take more time.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Layachi. As you see, if we don't keep time, our guests, they will, of course, all that expertise, they will say a lot. So this is it means they must all go. يتنحوا وقع. Um, Elif is a researcher, and currently she's a PhD student. When we first contacted her to be part of the panel, she said, "I cannot make it. I am in Canada. You know, I cannot travel." But she insisted to be here, and we're glad to have her because she's bringing in a perspective of women. I've worked 15 years on the ground in Africa and sub-Saharan countries. I can tell you, based on my own experience, more than 70 to 80% of my successful projects were led by women. Each time I had a man, man, it didn't work. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter if they were educated or not educated. And this is me. It's anecdotal, but it is a reality. So thank you for being with us, and she's here to share with us her experience working with women, particularly Kurdish women. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hamid. Everyone can hear me?
Yes, we can.
I really, yes, as Hamid mentioned, I really wanted to be there today, but this is really not a time for international travel, as you guys are all aware. So, yeah, I mean, I'm there today with you guys in spirit, and I just wanted to start off by thanking, the government politics department at St. John's for inviting me today, especially Dr. Cocozzelli for arranging this, and for Farida Bouattoura for putting this great panel together, and for inviting me. So I just wanted to quickly start off just with a small anecdote because I felt like I should maybe contextualize it a little bit. I mean, I will be talking today about what's sort of understood as Kurdish women's movement, but then in a larger context of the criminalization of the Kurdish population of Turkey, but not only in Turkey, also in what is known as the Autonomous Administration of North and Eastern Syria, or like Northeastern Syria, if you will. But I just wanted to say that, as we're sitting here speaking about Algeria, I mean, the Algerian revolution of independence and the participation of women in that revolution is so remarkable and is such an inspiration to the women's movements today as well. In fact, I teach a Middle Eastern feminism class as well, and this week I actually did it on the independence movement of Algeria that led to the independence in 1962, and the participation and the intersection between nationalism, colonialism, and gender at the time. And so I just wanted to say that because that's a pure coincidence, but also just that it's such an inspiration to the women's movement again today. The participation of women. Now, unfortunately, as we've heard, it hasn't necessarily gone. The patriarchal forces, both within and outside, have co-opted, the women's revolution, but there's still that tradition. So yeah, I thought that was a good way to sort of approach it. And this is gonna sound kind of bleak for a little while, but I'm hoping that more in the, I need to contextualize the situation a little bit, sort of what we're up against, and then I'm hoping in the round table we'll have more time for sort of opening up about strategies or what there is, what we can do. So I did want to, like I said, I also need to be aware of time, so I'm just gonna also try and be wary of time. So I wanted to certainly, like I said, put this in the context of criminalizing the Kurdish population of both Turkey and Syria, and actually even Iraq. But these are also simultaneously the colonized three parts of Kurdistan, that is the northern, southern, and western. So I'll get more into that, but I know it's going to be quite complicated because I'm going to be saying 3 different names for one place, but you have to understand that this is all extremely politicized. And so, just saying the word Kurdistan in itself, or acknowledging it as a region is a huge, is a political statement in itself. So there is basically, a very ongoing, sponsored, like state racist hate crimes against Kurds right now in Turkey. So I'll focus on Kurds in Turkey, then the ones in Syria, and then the ones in Iraq, and hopefully I can do all that in 10 minutes. Like I will try and, keep quick time. So there has been an escalation of the persecution of Kurdish ethnic minority in Turkey recently, and any sort of political or social affiliation that they have. And this is within the larger context, and of course I can't get into this, but this is the larger, historical context of discrimination and criminalization by the Turkish nation state, throughout their entire, political existence, or any sort of, moment of political autonomy. But very recently, and I'm sure not too many people heard about it, because that's how the government would like to keep it, but on July 30th, an armed attack was carried out against a Kurdish family's home in the Konya region of Turkey, and so 7 family members were killed. Their house was set on fire, and then just 2 months prior to this whole family had been attacked by sticks, stones, and knives by a group of Turkish, fascists who were saying, "We are nationalists, we will not let you live here." The reason that I'm trying to bring attention to this is because the prosecutors dismissed this as a hate crime, and said it was just a dispute between 2 families, but it is so clearly a state-sponsored crime, and also the state became complicit in just allowing, this murder, this brutal murder to just be dismissed. And this is kind of par for the course in Turkey. So, it's not just about necessarily the government, but the actual society, sadly, is based on this, entrenched systemic hatred, racism and hate towards, their Kurdish population. And then less than even 2 months before that, there was another murder, and it was an armed attack targeted at the Izmir office. Izmir is in Turkey, it's sort of southwestern Turkey, and this is the pro-Kurdish parliamentary party. So they're known as HDP. Sorry, I'm going to sit here and just say all of these acronyms, but just bear with me. But HDP is the People's Democratic Party, and they have been since their inception, and their various predecessors have always been targeted, shut down, arrested, assassinated, torture. I mean, all manner of horrific oppressions. But recently what happened is that they assassinated the daughter of a party employee who was just there eating her breakfast in the office building of this parliamentary party. She was, just assassinated by a state-sponsored, by a state-sponsored jihadist, basically. So this gentleman was training in, or this assailant was training in with the jihadist groups in Syria, owned by, under Turkish occupation. So, he was in prison, sure, but there was no proper investigation actually taking place to uncover who was really behind the crime, because there is no way that this individual could have just walked in and killed this woman. But the point is just that that's this is just examples of the wave of violent attacks that are constantly taking place across Turkey in recent months, recent years, recent decades, still, and this is a result of the criminalization policies that are carried out by the ruling party. And the ruling party right now is known as AKP, so that's Justice and Development Party. But they also have this kind of coalition with the sort of fascist nationalist party. And they basically just use it to target Kurds and the pro-Kurdish party, as I mentioned. So, and any kind of affiliation. And so in the larger picture, this becomes Kurdish women's liberation movement. And I'll get into more about the specifics of the women's role, but I just want to, sort of put the context. So these attacks have also, like I mentioned, the arrest of party members, There's also been a recent closure decision against the party, and so recently we were in the streets, well, here in Toronto at least, but we were here in the streets trying to bring attention to the fact that they're trying to shut down like a parliamentary party, in Turkey, under this, bizarre, like, gaze of, what do they say? They say that it's terrorism, right? So it's, but more importantly, the government's war and occupation policies that are ongoing, and this is what I'm going to get into, northeast Syria, are intensifying those hate crimes and those lynching against Kurds within Turkey, because they're seeing them as enemies within the state, because they have their, brethren or sisters, next to them. So I just want to, and then I would like to speak about specifically what's going on in northeastern Syria, or what is known as AANES. This is like the latest name for it, but it's the Autonomous Administration of North and Eastern Syria. So there has been, since 2018, so it's quite a long time now, but there has been since 2018 an occupation by Turkey of one of what is known as the 3 cantons of this self-administrated region, also known as Rojava, which is Western Kurdistan. So, there is a lot of significance to that, because Turkey sees this as a threat to their, to their sovereignty somehow. So they have, this is in vast violation of international law. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee. We were speaking of refugees. There's massive war crimes that have been committed by EU-produced and United States weapons. Hospitals, schools, drinking water facilities, and grain storage facilities have been deliberately shelled to destroy the infrastructure. Entire villages of Yazidis, Armenians, and Assyrians who had fled previous genocides were destroyed. And so please don't make the mistake of thinking that this entire, the region itself is not just, Kurdish by any means. And the Kurdish project, political project itself in that region is actually multi-ethnic and multi-religious. And so when Turkey occupied the space, they basically started targeting all of these minorities that have already had decades of genocidal policy against them. And then this has resulted in the resettlement of Islamic militias. They say that ISIS is finished, or ISIS is, been defeated, but this is just, this is very naive, actually. Right now what's going on is there are Islamist militias, al-Nusra, al-Jabhat, they're all in this occupied territories of Rojava, or the AANES, and people are being displaced from their homes, and these Islamist militias are proxies of Turkey, and we are seeing so many. It's just blatant complacency on the part of Turkey to use these Islamist militias to target the Kurdish population there, and those other ethnic minorities and religious minorities I was talking about. So this has been going on for 8 years, and like I said, you've got the picture. It's like lootings, bombings, destruction of religious sites, kidnappings, and arbitrary killings. And what is really important, what I really want to emphasize is that this is leading to a displacement of the peoples there in this region, and also a change in the demographic makeup of the population. And so this is genocide. This is like an ethnocide. They are trying to put jihadist proxies in these spaces and Turkify this entire region. So sorry about that.
You will have opportunity to elaborate on these points, because we have a lot of questions for you. So.
Okay, can I say one little thing about the women, or should I say this?
You have 50 seconds to close.
Okay, very quickly, sorry. There's so much, but what is the most, okay, 50 seconds. So what is the most important is that what these Islamists, jihadists, and Turkey and everyone is trying to do is to destroy this autonomous region that is focused on egalitarian principles, women's communes, women's structures, actually presenting an alternative to, to Sharia law in the region. And this to them is such a huge threat, and it's a threat to Turkey as well. And so basically, at the end of the day, Turkey is involved in a state-sponsored, clearly feminicide, if you will, feminicide of the women, of Kurdish women's movement, of women, and because the women are the ones that are being targeted directly.
Yes.
So I'll leave it at that, and then hopefully we can open that up.
Absolutely, we will.
The discussion.
Have you
Thank
noticed?
you very much.
Thank you. Have you noticed I said 50 seconds, she turned it to 50. It's typical Middle Eastern bargain. My son does it all the time. We have to bargain. We cannot help it. I'm sorry. Have you read Accidental Guerrilla? Oh, you should. It's a great book from Kilcullen because she was talking about Daesh and all what's going on. It's a segue to Farida, accidental social movement activist. But there is nothing bad about it, because in the book he talks about part-time fighters. Farmers are part-time fighters. Part-time they are farmers, and part-time they are fighters. I don't know how Farida does it. She's not part-time. This is the problem with Farida. She's full-time activist, full-time student, full-time professional, full-time everything, and she finds the time to come in. We should do this. We should do this. We should. Thank you, Farida. I'm really glad and honored to have her in my team. So I'm stealing her from Professor Cocozzelli. A few years and she's gone. I'm sorry. Please, Farida. Thank you. And you have 10 minutes. Don't bargain.
Don't worry. I'll try to summarize it in less. Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to start off by thanking you. Thank you so much, Professor Cocozzelli, first for remembering me after so many years, right, my bachelor's degree, and also for listening to us and giving us an opportunity to do this. I also like to thank St. John's, the Government and Politics Department. Jason and Shannon, where are you guys? Thank you so much for listening to all my kooky ideas and all my little details. I do appreciate it. I definitely want to thank all of you. Thank you so much. Our guest speakers for coming in, taking the time off your very busy schedules and setting the time to talk to us. And St. John's, and you guys, of course, for listening to us. All right, so then you might ask, well, who is Farida and why is she standing here? Well, as Hamid said, I'm kind of an accidental activist. If you asked me a year ago if I would be doing this, starting a nonprofit or advocating for the Algerian Iraq, I would have told you we're crazy. This was not something that I was into. So, what's my background? I am a special education and math teacher. I am a consultant in education, and I'm currently getting my PhD right here from St. John's. So how did I get here? Well, I'm not politically affiliated. I do not have any of the vast experiences that my colleagues do, and I am honored to sit among you. For me, this is personal. It is not political, it is personal. So how did I get here? I got here because in April, 2 of my cousins, my little baby cousins, to most Algerians, they know them as activists, right? People of great character. I know them as my little cousins, Tarek and Ismail Dabari. They were political detainees for simply advocating and being a part of the Iraq movement. Till this day, it has been clearly peaceful from the people. The only brutality and violence have come from the government. Okay. So who are my cousins? I know them personally. I know them quite well. I knew them since they were this big. I played with them. They're not criminals. Tarek, I can tell you, has a really strong personality. Never would stand down for anyone who bullied anyone next to him. I'm not surprised he's an activist. Ismail, he's a family man. And in fact, sadly, it saddens me to say that he had a son a few days ago that he's never met because he's in prison. Till this day, we don't know when their court dates will be. They were arrested, and Mountains of charges were pressed against them, mountains of allegation. In fact, when they were arrested, we had no idea where they were gone, and we didn't even know what their allegations were. We found out from the media. In Algeria, there really isn't any freedom of press. So the media knew what the allegations and the judgment before the trial, before the judge, before them themselves stood next to a magistrate or even went through the judicial process. Okay. So it was then that basically I obviously felt I had to do something, right? You can't just stand here and do nothing while my cousins are being tortured in jail. This is not to say American jail, this is Algerian jail, which is very, very different, right? Numerous amount of human rights violations. They're not provided with any essential, right? Not even clean water, not even water. Food and clothing is not provided by the facilities. Parents and families who are now down from 2 providers, home providers, have to somehow find the money and assets to send them, to pay for them being in prison. Okay, so I tried contacting everybody I knew. I tried to do this as an individual. For someone who's extremely Americanized, it's pretty scary to dive into something like this because you don't know if you're accidentally going to be pulled into some party or some radical group. And it's certainly not my intention. My intentions are not politics. I simply want to advocate for my cousins and the hundreds of others who have been unjustly detained. Okay? So I tried. I contacted every single mass media, numerous amounts of mass media, nobody answered. I contacted several human rights agencies, nobody answered. In fact, I was told by some that they don't cater for that particular region. Very nice. I thought human rights were universal. Guess not. I contacted several politicians, whether they are local, whether they're federal, previous presidents, any agency you name. Nobody answered back. Okay, it was clear that as an individual, there's nothing I can do much. Actually, that's incorrect. There was 2 people who did answer me, Professor Cocozzelli and Professor Dr. Layachi. Those were the only 2 who answered me back. So it was clear that I couldn't do this by myself. I had to start some kind of organization. Oddly enough, at the time, there was only 2 articles that came out by the summer, only 2 articles that covered the Algerian Hirak. Both of them were very critical, in the United States, pardon. Both of them were very critical of the Hirak. They said mainly 2 things, which I honestly took back as feedback. They said that it was highly unorganized, and it did not have a central goal. So I'm like, that's what we need to do. We need to organize, and we need to find a central goal. So I tried contacting numerous advocates, but the issue is, the regime has created such fear and paranoia in people that most people that you see on Algerian activists or anyone really on Facebook does not disclose any kind of information. Now, how does someone like me, who lived in the United States most of their life, get to find out who these people really are? Again, there is a perpetual fear that somehow, accidentally, I'm going to be working for some kind of radical group or someone with a political agenda, which is not what I'm interested in. I merely want to advocate for human rights. It was then that I actually stumbled on Hamid. I felt particularly comfortable working with him for one reason. He was searchable. I found his LinkedIn. I found his affiliations. I know exactly where universities he worked at, people he was associated with. To someone who was very public, who you know who you were working with. And that's when we talked and we decided, all right, first things first, we need to organize. So we did that, we started RISE, right? And since then, we've been pursuing all kinds of avenues, and trying to basically advocate for people who don't have a voice yet. So, why am I here? Well, then I'll answer your question one more time. Because I felt that as a privileged American, with all my privileges and my rights are guaranteed by the Constitution and Bill of Rights, or even if they are infringed upon, I have a way to advocate for myself. I have a way to go about it. There is a process, there is a chance. And to many people in Algeria, this is a mirage. This doesn't exist. So I decided that this, in essence, was my calling, to use my privilege to help people attain their human rights. Thank you so much for listening.
I know what Farida is talking about. I feel it deeply. We have gone we all go through these same struggles, whether we're Algerians, North African, Middle Eastern Africans. Now we are privileged Americans and we want to serve back, give back home. And this is a platform for us. Sometimes I stand in front of the Congress in DC or at different circle with 45, 50, sometimes I could put 50 Algerian flags. My friends, they were jailed in Algeria for putting one Algerian flag on their balcony in Algeria. It has become a symbol of Hirak, and we can do it here in the United States. My friend, Pamela, I like John. It's not Dr. Struss. Yeah, I would say Dr. Struss. We are in the arena of academic arena. She was my professor back in Mason. And I was like, really? She's always calm. She's always like relaxed. Always like, until I took her classes and actually she applies, like bringing the peace in the room. This is what she does. She brings naturally. She is into facility. She sees conflicts everywhere, big or small, but it's her duty to take care of those conflicts. So please welcome Dr. Struss. Will share some.
Greetings. I'm so happy to be here and appreciate being invited. Dr. Cocozzelli and your grad assistants have been great. And my grad assistant is accompanying me here today, and I just really appreciate you guys' help and support. I want to talk about, let's first talk about nonviolence. We adopt the means of nonviolence because our end is a community of peace with itself. We will try to persuade with our words, but if our words fail, we will try to persuade with our acts. And that quote is by Martin Luther King. Welcome, fellow peacemakers. I'm delighted to share my perspective of advocacy and working with others, both friend and foe, to find a collaborative solution. Most importantly, I want to share skills that have worked for me. One skill that I believe is desperately needed to bring about change and resolution is advanced communication skills. Something that is also helpful is to be curious. Being curious prevents me from being judgmental and leaping to misguided conclusions. And I'll give you an example. During my master's education, I accompanied my professor to Jerusalem, Israel. I was the first student, grad student ever allowed to go with a professor out of the continental US by Mason. He's both well respected by the Israeli, Jewish and Palestinian leadership. We worked with both. He had advised me when I got there, because I landed a little bit before him, to watch which gate I walked into in the old city in Jerusalem. Has anybody ever been to Israel? You know, there are several different gates to enter the city. So he'd give me a stern warning about not going through the Muslim gate. Obviously, I stick out there. And he was a little bit afraid for my safety and that kind of thing. But, you know, I stayed at the Vatican's Hotel, which, by the way, is wonderful. And walked out, looked to my left, and saw a gate. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go through that gate. That's close by, I can see it. It was the Muslim gate. And I walked in, and people kind of looked at me, but everyone was very respectful. I did not feel threatened at all. Was on Via Dolorosa, which is one of the streets of the 7 Stations of the Cross, and went into a shop there and struck up a conversation with the shopkeeper. And he immediately took me under his wing and said, you know what? You'll probably be okay, but I'm gonna escort you out of this sector and we're gonna go down the back alleys, in which we did. He took me to the Christian sector, and there he introduced me to another storekeeper. And that man wound up being my savior. And anyway, what happened was we were working sometimes 14-hour days with all the leadership. Mark told the cab driver in Hebrew to take me back to the hotel. And that is when I learned about several sects of Judaism. And one of them is men are not supposed to be in the company of a woman who does not have a male escort, which I did not. He took me 2 blocks, dumped me out of the cab at midnight. And anyway, thank God the signs were in 3 languages. I walked back to the old city. That shopkeeper was there working in this store at midnight. And I walked in and he was like, oh my God, what are you doing? You shouldn't be out. And, oh, let me feed you. They feed you way too much food there. And I was like, no, no, no. And he took me back to the hotel, and the next morning, they had found a Muslim cab driver to stay with me for the next 3 weeks. He took me everywhere. I had his personal cell. And anyway, he would pick me up from the hotel, then drop me off, and then pick me back up and take me back to the hotel. And I'm forever grateful for that. But had I gone along with the prejudgment of my professor that, hey, don't trust them, I would have been in bad shape, because they literally, I think, saved my life. Realize, too, that sometimes your adversary is likely experiencing the same stress, concern, fear, and frustration that you are. You're basically dispute and conflict partners. And many times the conflict is fueled by drivers, and they can be very serious and consequential. The most significant driver of all of them is identity. It's rooted in who you believe you are and who they believe you are. And another substantial driver is power, access to power, resources, or access to resources. And I think you've heard that expressed in the other presentations. Please understand that I'm sharing my experience in a liberal democracy and the skills I use that work within the political system. That being said, regardless of the political system, we're all human and we all have needs like, safety, security, food, and we also have aspirations and quests for self-actualization. A concept that I have been working on developing is, I call it the life lens. And it's basically based on our genetics, our origin, values, and personality. All contribute to that life lens, our ethics of honesty, integrity, confidentiality, and trustworthiness. Genetics are set. We can't change who our family is. Basically, we can't change our ethnicity, physical health. Also, origin, which is changeable, is based in geography, culture, customs, laws, politics, and that kind of thing. Ethics are changeable with age. We do evolve in our ethics and our values. And our personality also can be changed through time. There is a diagram. I've written a paper to go along with this presentation. If you'd like a copy of it, I've got a sheet and you sign up and I will send it to you. We are trying to build bridges with decision makers. Collaboration provides a foundation for building relationships, political actors, decision makers, and also political activists frequently appear to be adversaries to one another. Identifying the common needs and goals will help transform the adversarial communication into a collaborative relationship. One other thing, that if you do not know your conflict style, I've got a test in the back of this paper. I really strongly advise you to take that test so you kind of know what your conflict style is. The Social Advocates Toolkit, all advocacy at its core is an exercise in empathy. So what is good communication? So often our word choices fail us. Rather than creating a space of meaningful dialogue, we erect barriers using Horton's dirty dozen of judging, sending solutions, blaming, globalizing, ignoring, insulting, interrupting, sarcasm, and stating opinion as fact. Basically, Neil Katz of Syracuse suggests that communication processes can be thought of information sharing and using specific skills under our control. We communicate words, and the way we communicate that, we are modeling who we are. Listening to another is an integral part of communication. It follows the thoughts and feelings of another and builds understanding of what the other is saying and their meaning interpreted through their life lens. Communication is like a loop. I want to focus on Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, and that includes observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And there are two parts to the process, is expressing honestly through those four components and receiving empathetically through the four components. Harnessing passion, and we've seen passion today. The emotions that flow while advocating for a position are very powerful. They are motivating. They elicit attention from others and can be the fuel that leads to conflict. It's difficult to listen when somebody is shouting. While it's difficult, speaking from a place that champions facts, offers examples to illustrate positions, and asks questions is more effective. Emotions are not always irrational and should not be ignored. Some are very positive and can motivate us to a good place. Be sure and pay attention to the personalities and passions of your adversaries and those that you will be speaking with. When assembling a team, one basic concept of forming a social group is to attract people who are like-minded, willing to build their interrelationship, and then articulate their dispute and conflict with others. And we've seen an example of that today. Holding similar goals is also very helpful. And leadership matters. That is where you are. You're leaders, you're here at a university learning, and it is very important that you know who you are and where you're going. Your primary role is to help create goals for a group. As a leader, you may be organizing diverse interests and uniting them on particular goals. Know your adversary. Spend time researching, understanding, and assessing your adversary. Remember to be curious. Don't be judgmental. What does their life lens look like? What are they the most passionate about? What could be driving them to this position? Look for fear and anger. What are they afraid of? What you see and hear is the adversary's position, and that is what we call positions. And if you think of an iceberg, the positions are kind of the top of the iceberg, but underneath the water is also interest and needs. So be sure and pay attention. Look below the surface. Another thing that is quite helpful is something we call conflict mapping. The one that I'm giving today is Chris Mitchell's Spitzerow. It's like, what are the sources of the conflict, who's involved, what are their interests, what tactics are they using, what are the changes over time, how is it enlarged, what are the roles of the party, and what are the outcomes, and who are the winners. Be sure when you're negotiating to do it with ethics. And again, that emanates from your life lens. One of the most important attributes people have is their personal integrity, and it's very valuable when negotiating. I will share an ethical dilemma that I think illustrates that. During the summer of 2012, I was conducting doctoral research in Ecuador. I traveled through all the regions, and my last stop was in southern Ecuador, not too far from Peru, and I went to a village called Villacabamba, and it's in a blue region. Do you guys know what a blue region is? A blue region is most of the people live there to be at least 100 years old. and they think the water has something to do with that. So there was a river that flowed through and was very attracted to people. There was a group of American expats there, and they were trying to take over this village, and there was this gorgeous 8-foot diameter fountain that had been built by the indigenous people 200 years before out of rocks, glass, and whatever materials they could find. They wanted to tear down this fountain and put a statue of their cult leader. And the village was very perplexed how to deal with it because they kept trying to throw American democracy. Well, it's a provincial government, so they didn't understand it. And I walked in to try to help the local people understand how to deal with the expats and how to push back a bit. So there are dispute resolution tools. The ones that I use a lot are negotiation, mediation, and facilitation. Both of those use a third-party neutral to help find a solution. And if any of those are interesting to you, I look it up. You can take my class online. Mediation is voluntary as well as facilitation. And both are trying to help groups of people or individuals come together for a solution. I've shared a lot of information with you, giving you many things to consider. First, know thyself. What is your life lens, which you speak and interpret life through? Communication skills are very important. Pay attention to how you say things and actively listen. Do ask questions, rephrase what you've heard to make sure you've heard it clearly. Use nonviolent communication process. Harness your passion. It will help motivate you toward a desirable conclusion. Basically, in closing, I just want you to remember that building a bridge will lead a way forward to a worthy goal, and please join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Struss. As you may have noticed, she gave a lot of techniques and skills needed for social movement activists like us to use them. And this is what we need in Algeria. And I'm going to make sure that her presentation will be posted on our Facebook for our activists to learn from that. This leaves us half an hour for a few questions and to wrap up. I am on diet. It means no starter, no dessert, but I go straight to the meat. This is not what they teach you when you learn about facilitation, right? Warm up and all that crap. So I'm going to turn it to my friend, Ambassador Limbert. And this comes from the people. I have received this. It's on mine. It's on mine. If you don't like it, this is not me. It's the people on Facebook. So
nothing personal.
Nothing personal here. Nothing. And I will give just two, three questions, and after that, I will turn the floor to you, and you can ask whatever question you want. So this coming from Middle East. Many people in Middle East and Africa express strong opinions about U.S. involvement in maintaining or keeping dictators or authoritarian regimes in place, despite reports that it advocates and does everything it can to promote democracy. How would you respond to this?
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I got it.
Yeah, I mean, people in the Middle East, they blame United States for supporting and maintaining dictators in place, despite the fact that they say we are here to advocate for democracy. So how would you respond to this?
Sure. Yeah, this is part of what I said earlier on. Thank you for the question. I mean, it's a good question. And I don't, frankly, I don't have a good or easy answer to it. When I said these subjects are hard, I meant them. They are hard because they are, you work in an area, I mean, I worked in an area of conflicting interests. I served, for example, we served early in my career, I served in Saudi Arabia. We had, the U.S. government had large interests in Saudi Arabia, for good or bad. You may disagree with them. You may agree with them, and a lot of those interests, frankly, had very little to do with democracy or human rights. They involved, for example, sale of defense equipment. They involved issues of basing, support for U.S. forces. They involved things like price of oil. Now, what are you going to do? You know, you balance it out. Now, remember, as someone representing the U.S. government, you represent the position of your government. You do not represent your personal views. And frankly, there were times the two come in conflict. But as a matter, I mean, I worked for, when I started off in my government career, Richard Nixon was president. I mean, I worked under Nixon, Carter, Ford, Reagan, from this side to that side, I didn't have to work under our last president, however. I had thankfully retired by then. That might have been too much. But that's what basically that's what you do. And there's some times when, how do you say this? You kind of hold your nose. And you make the best case you can, because you are, sometimes I put it, you're a defense lawyer. And sometimes your client is guilty as hell. Anybody watch this wonderful Australian series, Rake? Anyone watch it? It's wonderful on Netflix. The main character is a defense lawyer. 95% of his clients are, murderers, drug dealers, thieves, embezzlers. And he makes the best case he can. He often gets them off. I mean, it's amusing, but you make the best case you can. If it gets down to it, I mean, we've had things like this where people say, no, basically, I'm not doing that anymore. And the alternative is to resign. The alternative is to resign. But again, the question, I goes back to what our last speaker, Dr. Struss, said was so good. How do you get this message across? This may be a message someone doesn't want to hear. How do you put it in a non-threatening way, in a sort of a non-threatening way that doesn't provoke immediate conflict? Like, why are you murdering your own people? Doesn't work very well. Doesn't work very well. Maybe you say something like, well, explain to me how the death of 10,000 people in this region benefits your society. I'd really like to understand that. As an alternative approach. Of course, you have to make sure your words aren't dripping with sarcasm when you say that, because they may. Unfortunately, people point out the hypocrisy sometimes in our foreign policy, and frankly, it's there. It's there. I don't deny it. And as someone who carried out the policy, what all you can do is make it the best that you can. I mean, I served in Iraq right after the invasion. That was not a position, something covered with glory. But then I served in a lot of places where things didn't go well. for the United States. People often ask me, did everywhere you go turn into a fiasco? I served in Iran, Iraq, Sudan. So no, but they did. But they did. But again, you make the best of. You have sometimes make the best of it as you can. That's really all I can. That's really all I can say. These are good questions. Unfortunately, as I said, I wish we lived in a better world where we didn't have to practice hypocrisy. Sometimes I think we do.
Thank you for your honesty as usual, and diplomacy too. We saw how he was taking it in a very diplomatic way, all being honest about his answers. And I will segue quickly to Dr. Layachi. I have read things and heard you on some political shows where you hammer those authoritarian regimes, like Songon, like you take off the glove. This is a French expression, you know, like I'm gonna hammer you. So, what is your take on the other side? Now we're talking about the other perspective.
What do you mean the other side?
Like, what should we do? We as activists to force them to have gap to leave. What should be done?
Listen, even before the Iraq happened, sometimes I go over some of my writings looking for something I have said or some source I have cited, and I discovered a statement I made, I think in 2016, and I think it was something that was looking at scenarios, different scenarios for the future. It was working with some big natural gas project, and I just said that given the situation in Algeria, given the configuration of forces, given the nature of the party system, given the nature of the opposition, given the shrewdness of the people who are in power, those facing the public and those behind the scene, those are the real decision makers. That the only way a good change can happen in Algeria is when there is a mass movement that is persistent, that is loud, and that is supported. So, and it happened. I couldn't tell when it's going to happen. These things we didn't predict the Arab Spring. We didn't predict the end of the Cold War. We missed a lot of things.
Okay.
And, but you could, at least I could tell that was absolutely needed for things to shake, because the opposition was absolutely divided, or co-opted, or repressed. Those who are making decisions in Algeria themselves were not one person, but they are groups, clans, and often fighting each other. And at times, a coalition of the clans wins over the other, and the policy goes that way, and other times it goes the other way. And when they do not get along, that's when there is a moment for the social movement to burst. And this is exactly what happened. They could not decide on what to do with the paralyzed president, the succession crisis. And that was just a terrific movement a terrific moment for the social movement to get in. But then, what happened after that is a problem. So, and I have no issue, no problem criticizing the system. I have had, I always expect to be picked up.
Yeah.
And I was once picked up. I told her, I got into an organization to meet people in the government research center, and then as soon as I walk in, the receptionist gives me the phone. There is a call for you. Excuse me. Me? I don't even know you. Yes, this is the Secret Service. Want to talk to me. They didn't have drones at that time in those years yet. How the hell did they know?
Thank you for the insight. As you see, when you're on the ground, when you experience it, when you live it, it's quite threatening. I will shift gears. One more question, maybe to Elif. Is she with us? Yes. Are you with us?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Right here.
I don't know if you can tie it to, you will tie it somehow to women because this is your main focus, but I will start it with COVID-19. So COVID-19 has dramatically affected the entire world, which quickly, learned how to come and work together to find solutions. For the first time, people realized that the shutdown in one part of the world impacted the other parts of the world. So how do you take this newfound realization and apply it to nonviolent movements? Which means people like in Kurdistan, Algeria, or elsewhere, may impact them in unforeseen ways. So bottom line, how can all this social movement come together? In a few minutes, of course, without bargain, please. Thank you.
Wow, what a question. I mean, I guess if we could actually, get to the bottom of this, we wouldn't even necessarily need to be here. So I will try very briefly. You bring up COVID-19, at least I'll bring up this much, and I think this is not certainly exclusive to Kurdistan or to Algeria or Middle East in general, but there was what became very clear for women is there was a huge exacerbation of violence against women, actually. And so I think that, COVID-19 brought to light a lot of not only just patriarchy, state patriarchy necessarily, but also, within the home, this entrenched one. So, I know that during COVID-19, our friends, our different organizations were in the streets trying to bring attention to the ongoing feminicide of Kurdish women in Turkey and in Syria, as I mentioned, but then the exacerbated effects by COVID-19, and that also goes for the indigenous communities in both Canada and America, for that matter. And now, how I'm going to tie that to what we should do? It seems. I think the most important thing is that what we have to realize is, you're talking about non-violent methods, and so what I've come to realize in all of these years and all of this work is that one of the biggest aspects of doing this kind of advocacy work is diplomacy. For better or for worse sometimes, but that is just what I've come to realize, and so, again, for us or for the movement or for, for the different movements and for the women's movement even is to put pressure on governments to act and to be held responsible by these international norms. There is always, there's a much larger debate about what is violence, what is state violence, what is state violence against people. That's a much larger debate. But certainly, I think we need to work on, we have to recognize that diplomacy is now a huge factor of all this and always has been, actually.
Thank you. I have some more questions, but I would like to turn it to our audience. If someone wants to, feel free, it's time for you to go ahead. Do we have a mic, or she can just, okay, maybe louder? Please name, affiliation, and your question. Thank you.
Oh, okay, so my name is Ines. I don't think I'm in this class, there are so many people arriving.
Okay.
I'm a law student. And I have a question for Mr. Layachi, because you talked about the Iraq movement and the fact that Bouteflika was not in power anymore. So I know Algeria has a new president, Tebboune. Do you think that the military is going to try again to extend its terms, but like they did with Bouteflika? And would this trigger another Iraq movement in Algeria?
The new president, who was, elected in an election that nobody really wanted, maybe 20% or less than 20% of the voters participated. The protesters did not want any reform, any election, any change in the hands done by the regime itself, because the regime itself was in question. So the election went through, and Tebboune was elected. Tebboune has served as prime minister for 3 months before under Bouteflika. By the way, Bouteflika died on September 17th. So he had served, according to different commentaries, he had served for 3 months and he was kicked out because he started talking about fighting corruption. Because Bouteflika was surrounded by people who were allowed to do a lot of dealing. They're private corporations who get huge contracts with the government. And then they extend their financial support during elections and so on. And they, so Tebboune brought in. Those who know the Algerian system and how at least we understand it functions, no one can be head of state in Algeria without the military stamp on it. You can't, you just can't. So Tebboune appears to be the least likely person to reshuffle the deck. So he was acceptable. And he's going to serve as long as he serves them. And whatever their interest, they want security as a priority, number one, unity is priority number, and democracy is maybe a little bit, human rights maybe a little bit. So whatever the agenda is, he has to fulfill it or to go along with it. And if he tries to become a problem, then there will be another election or something else that will happen. So that's how things have worked since independence.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Layachi. Any other question? Please don't be shy. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Patrick. I'm a student in the government and politics department. My question is for the ambassador. Just in your experience, what would you say are likely solutions where human rights are affirmed in the theater or the environment that you're in, while at the same time American interests are being explicitly met? Like, what are solutions for both of those, do you think, line up?
Thank you. The question was, if I understood the question correctly, the question was sort of what the priority of human rights would be. Will be an American policy, or?
No, like, what are solutions in your opinion where human rights are affirmed as well as American interests? Because you said sometimes those might come into conflict, but where do you see?
Okay, good. I mean, I'd like to tell you that there is no conflict. But you know that I can't tell bald-faced lies like that to you. I wouldn't be speaking. On the other hand, you know, we come in during my career, we came in for a lot of criticism from our host government for upholding. We're standing for these rights, and these rights, these things were important to us. For example, again, and go back to Guinea. In Guinea, if you know a little bit of its very tragic history, some similarities with Algeria. Algeria, actually, in its relation with the colonial experience with the French. Under the dictatorship of Sékou Touré, there was an infamous place called Camp Boiro. Camp Boiro was a torture and death center. People were taken there, basically thrown into cells, locked up and left to starve to death, among other things. And when we were there, of course, this was long after, when I was there, this was after the time of Sékou Touré, but there was an organization called the Widows of Camp Boiro. And they were looking for the remains of their husbands. They didn't know where their husbands were. Their husbands had died there. They didn't know where they were buried. And so they held a vigil, like a prayer service, kind of an Islamic memorial for these dead without any bodies, without the presence of any bodies, and they invited somebody from the American embassy, and I made sure that somebody, either me or somebody, was there to represent us. Nobody, we didn't have to do anything, didn't have to say anything, just had to be there to show that we cared. And we got, I mean, I personally got very strong criticism from some of the host government. But to me, this was important to show what we do stand for in this. Now, is it pure? Is it always, are we always on the right side of things? No, we're not. But when we can be, we need to be. And we're going to get criticized for it. But that's going to happen. But I think it's extremely important that we stand up for these kinds of values as much as we can, and in a very imperfect world at the same time. But thank you for your question. It's a great one.
Thank you. I think Professor Layachi wants to follow up on this one.
I would like to follow up just shortly. It is a real dilemma, of course, in foreign policy. And when discussing this with students and with colleagues, the only time I personally remember where United States foreign policy was fully aligned, at least, it seemed, with human rights issues, was the Jimmy Carter presidency. Jimmy Carter presidency, which had, declared a foreign policy that would center on human rights. Human rights would be a central piece of U.S. foreign policy, where U.S. foreign policy would be less militarized, less weaponized, not just that the U.S. government was not going to pursue foreign policy that gives priority to military means or military sales, and so on. I was working on the case of the U.S. sales of weapons to Morocco. That was part of my dissertation, my thesis. And I worked on the whole process and how the administration used the arms sales as a tool to pressure the Moroccan king, who was a very harsh, monarch on his people, to lessen the repression and so on. And he didn't want to listen, so they kept him off. No weapons. They stopped. The weapons were supposed to go through Italy and then sent to Morocco, and there was a stoppage. No, Jimmy Carter faced a lot of pressure at home here. He was not going to make it to a second term anyway. And also, before the man, as I called him, on the white horse coming from California to become the next president, the world was witnessing, or the U.S. foreign policy was witnessing, or the U.S. foreign policy makers were witnessing almost helplessly important events in the world. The invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, remember that. Nicaragua, the revolution of Sandinistas. El Salvador, the fall of the Shah of Iran. Iran was a very important ally of the United States, was very important in especially helping with listening posts on the Soviet Union. And all these things were happening, and the U.S. was just watching. Jimmy Carter, human rights, you're my buddy. Anything else, it's not my problem. And this is at least how people saw U.S. foreign policy under Jimmy Carter, where you had human rights priority. So that was the end of it. Jimmy Carter was not going to make it to a second term. Jimmy Carter had to be brought down for a variety of reasons, including foreign policy. And then the man on the white horse coming from California, Ronald Reagan, was going to completely flip back to the foreign policy of the old days. Shoot first, ask questions later. Human rights, excuse me, is that English? Sorry. He always said, I can't hear you.
Thank you.
And so then human rights was pushed aside, maybe lip service here and there, and so on. But the conflict is absolutely real. There is hope. There has been hope, at least in the air, for a short while, that the Biden administration will bring back human rights to the fore. It is not likely to happen, unfortunately, according to me. We could discuss this.
Thank you. I think we have one more question from the audience. Go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Hannah McLean. I'm also a government and politics and social justice studies major, and I also had a question for the ambassador. You mentioned earlier that there were many instances in which your individual opinions conflicted with that of the nation you were representing. Did you ever, from a human rights perspective, have a moral, almost disinterest in the issue that you were representing, such as under different administrations, if those presidents or political parties that were more dominant in the nation at the time, if they kind of were making legislative action that went against your personal beliefs of what is in the best interest of human rights?
Thank you. Let me see if I understood the question. The question was really, did it ever come to a personal conflict? Yes, it did. I'd be lying to you if I said it never did. It never did. And again, it's one of those cases, I think, where you do the best you can. I remember one time, I think I had to, this wasn't really a human rights issue, but it was, I had to defend an American tobacco company, the interests of some American cigarette maker. And so, I sort of, again, I did it, but on the side, I said to the gentleman there, I said, look, this stuff is poison. You know, that's the position of my government. You know, on the other hand, we are not, our function as representatives of you, I mean representatives of the country, is not to give our personal views. It's to give the views of the country and the government, and the government, which I think is still democratically elected. Last I saw, it was a near thing, but it still is. And remember, the oath that we take, like all officers, military officers take the same oath, foreign service officers take the same oath, president takes the same oath, is not to a person or a party. It's to the Constitution. And through that, it's to the whole people. So, I mean, we represent the people. We represent the people. The government, which presumably represents is elected by the people, and that's whom we represent. And that's the position. That's what we have to, you know, the person I'm speaking to in Algeria or Saudi Arabia or wherever it is, he doesn't give a hoot about my view. He doesn't care what I think. He cares about what the government thinks. And you want to make it, I mean, you want to make it as palpable, you know, as digestible as possible, but sometimes it's pretty harsh. And sometimes it gets into, I mean, people think of diplomacy as, you know, all people sitting around drinking tea, making polite chit-chat. It isn't. Sometimes it's people sitting around yelling at each other with excuses to my conflict resolution people. It can come to that. Or, you know, at least involve some very serious disagreements. But thanks for your question, and thanks for I encourage you, by the way, all of you in this room, I encourage you to think of a career in international service. It's a great career. I did it for 35 years. If it's something to consider, I can guarantee you, you will never be bored doing it. At least judging from my own experience. So it's something very much worth considering. I'd encourage you to give it some thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Actually, I was going to give each one of our speakers 1 minute, please, no more than 1 minute to close. The Ambassador did it, or 30 seconds. 30 seconds to close. Any closing? I had much more questions, particularly one on climate change and conflict, but unfortunately we cannot ask all questions. Let's start with Elif. Please, 30 seconds.
I mean, we've covered so much, so it's so hard to
Any advice to our students here, for instance?
I mean, I think being aware of, of what is going on in the region, specifically we're talking here about North Africa and Middle East, is really important because it all affects every single one of us in ways you can't even imagine. And much, it might seem like it's on the other side of the world, but it's affecting us, and the struggles of the peoples over there, the struggles of the women over there, is really, will affect us back home. And I really agree with Farida that as a North American, I also try and take full advantage of my privilege to be able to try and bring attention to the plight of our people. So yeah, I think if anything, just to really try and keep yourself aware. I know ignorance is bliss, but some of us don't have that privilege. So,
Thank you, Ali. Dr. Struss, 30 seconds, please.
Okay. The one thing that I really want to strongly emphasize is to sharpen your communication skills. And I'm not talking about the typical communications class where I'm going to give a speech, and I'm going to write a good email. Really know how to communicate. And if you don't, go find somebody to tell you how. Because it's not necessarily natural. Depending on your family situation, you may not have seen that model, but it will save you so much if you will sharpen your communication skills.
Thank you, Doctor. Farida, please, in 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'll be very short, no worries. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and please spread the word. Talk about it. Bring awareness to others. We're not getting much of media coverage, so we appreciate the lending hand. So please talk about it, post about it. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Layachi?
Yes, for the students here, I would I really strongly suggest, would like to see you being more aware of U.S. foreign policy, keeping a tab on it, because what the government does in our name, really counts for something, and we need to be aware of it. After 9/11 hit the United States, many people discovered, the nature of U.S. foreign policy overseas, because that was part of the discussion on that. And the second point is to maintain your awareness of the people who are struggling for basic needs outside of the United States. Of course, there were many fighting here too, struggling, but outside, and see for basic needs, food, of course, and shelter, but there are also human rights, and see if you can lend a hand by please being a voice.
Thank you, Doctor. And please let me, as the chair of RISE, thank Dr. Cocozzelli, the University of St. John's, and you for coming here. This means a lot. This means a lot. And we have on Facebook thousands, sometimes we got up to 100,000 people following us. And this, trust me, the feedbacks are, it's just overwhelming. Thank you so much. Now we'll turn it to Dr. Cocozzelli.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying, and thank you. There's some snacks back there. So, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
إذن كملنا la conférence ودرك